Lori Comallie-Caplan is a New Mexico licensed master social worker, a licensed educational diagnostician with a master's degree in psychological counseling. Additionally, she holds advanced certification for mediation from the University of New Mexico School of Law. Mrs. Comallie-Caplan has 40 years of experience in the field of teaching, counseling, coaching, evaluation, mediation, and educational consultation. She is best known for her work with gifted individuals through the lifespan and is a frequent presenter for state, regional, national, and international associations on meeting the needs of the gifted. In her private practice in Las Cruces, New Mexico, Mrs. Comallie-Caplan specializes in therapy and evaluation of gifted and twice exceptional individuals of all ages. Mrs. Comallie-Caplan is currently the president of New Mexico Association for the Gifted and previously served as secretary, president-elect, and president of the international organization supporting the emotional needs of the gifted. We are so excited to have you here, and we so appreciate you giving up your time today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Thank you for having me. And I did just want to also thank Katrina, who is actually a person who wears many, many hats for NMAG. She's our webmaster, our social media specialist, our publicity specialist. And because she was a new board member last year, she gets to offer a professional development to her district. And so that's what we're doing today. And so that's kind of an appeal if you're interested in being a board member. Our general meeting will be at the NMAG Fall 2020 conference in October. It will be online this year. And another one of you could get another free professional development for your district. So we'd love to see you come over and join forces with New Mexico Association for the Gifted. Okay, so when I introduce myself, I usually say, my name is Lori Comallie-Caplan, and I'm a recovering perfectionist. And I have to face that every day. And so I do need to let you know that I emailed your handouts before I had my final copy done. So you'll find some mistakes in there, and I will just have to breathe deeply and learn to live with that. Today, we're going to talk about 8 areas. I hope we're going to talk about 8 areas. And I'm going to ask everybody to kind of keep on mute, because when there's noise in the background, it takes away from the person who's speaking. And if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. And Katrina's going to keep me going and keep me in line and make sure that I'm able to, she'll stop me and we can answer questions along the way as well. Okay, so we're going to talk about the neurology of the gifted brain, asynchronous development, perfectionism, anxiety and stress, trauma coping styles, give you some practical information on how teachers can help their students, including some cognitive behavioral strategies, which I find work very well for our gifted students because they're in their heads a lot. Okay, so this quote by Sylvia Rim I really like, because despite or maybe because of our gifted children's intelligence or insightfulness, they might find it difficult to cope with fears and misgivings. And they may see many of their peers are far more focused on their own day-to-day activities, or they're not as interested in upsetting events or the things that we're looking at now in the pandemic. The adults in their lives may not be equipped to answer some of the depth and the questions of depth and complexity that our gifted kids give us. And so we have to really be able to know that these kids are experiencing things in a different way. And think about what has happened. School is suddenly shut down, routines are disruptive, family members they might see are sad, they're sick, they're scared. The thing that's killing me, and I think most of our kids, is it's just the media is continuous about COVID. My husband happens to keep our TV on CNN all the time, so all I see is the death toll, hour after hour, and it's very difficult for our children. So if you have a gifted child, and we know they experience very strong emotions, right? So if they're already intense, or they already have difficulty processing things because of their asynchrony or because they're twice exceptional. That's just them in normal circumstances. Think about how they have little escape for these intense feelings during the time of COVID-19. In order to understand why these feelings are so intense for our kids, we do have to have some understanding of the neurology of the gifted brain. You know, I would love to talk to you guys like all day long. So I have a lot of information I've tried to be as concise as possible with. If you have any further questions for me, I will type my information. Well, I have my information in the slide at the end. Please feel free to follow up, you know, through email or a phone call, and I'm happy to send you materials or answer additional questions. So we know, even though we don't just use intelligence anymore as a single factor to identify gifted students, we still use cognitive ability as an indicator of giftedness. And one of the things that we know from research is that those people that have a higher IQ, their brains are different. They're more efficient. There's more measurable tissue. There's less measurable activity. In my old days, as I've been doing this for a long time now, I used to stand up in a room, and now here we're in front of a camera, you know, and I'd throw one hand out in one direction and the other hand out in the other direction, you know, and say, oh, I can't wait till we have brain scans that will show us how a gifted child's brain lights up. And I was just absolutely sure that we would see a brain completely on fire with color. But guess what? It's exactly the opposite, because our gifted people learn very efficiently. There's actual less color showing up in the fMRIs. There's less measurable activity. And so we know that gifted students learn in different ways, and it's not just faster, it is different. It'll be fun to find the day when we actually can do brain scans, you know, on anybody that wants one. Maybe it will even replace IQ tests at college entrance exams. So when we have this different learning, the different type of brain, we find that the gifted brain results in greater intensity, sensitivity, idealism, and right now that's really at work, perfectionism, activity, not just bodies, but busy brains and busy bodies, and nonconformity. These are all results of being wired differently. One of the neuroscientists, one of the best neuroscientists that I've worked with is Nicole Tetrault. And she specifically studies the neuroscience of the bright brain. And she has several things online, and she will be presenting at our conference this year. She writes, she always uses this Shakespeare quote, "Present fears are less than horrible imaginings." If you know a gifted kid with an imaginational and an emotional overexcitability, you know these are the kids that have nightmares, that have unrealistic fears, because their brains go to that place. They imagine the most horrible things. And so it is important during this time that we help our children tell the right story, that they stay connected to reality. You know, higher IQ individuals have increased brain regions responsible for emotional processing, which we're going to learn is both a blessing and a curse. And that leads to intensified feelings of happiness, sadness, anxiety, disappointment, frustration. I know probably all of you have experienced at one time or another, if you've worked with any gifted kids at all, a gifted meltdown. So it's important to understand where that comes from. Gifted children, because they have these intense emotions, may not be identified as suffering from anxiety because of an absence of obvious symptoms. And so it's really important for us to understand that even though they feel these things very intensely, they may also have a psychological diagnosis of anxiety. And so we have kids that, you know, they basically they have symptoms that range from psychosomatic symptoms, gastrointestinal symptoms, headaches, stomach aches. They have symptoms of sensory issues, so heightened awareness of, you know, what they touch, what they taste, what they smell, and so forth. And these can be very difficult. If we look at the knowledge that we got from Kaczmarek-Dabrowski, and I think most people know about the theory of positive disintegration at this time, and the accompanying overexcitabilities that he studied in those 5 areas: intellectual, emotional, sensory, psychomotor, and imaginative, and how that elevates their experience in the world, whether that elevation is from happy things or whether that elevation is from scary or horrifying things. It is elevated for our gifted children. So if we look at the psychological responses to stressors, both real and imagined, because remember that imaginational overexcitability can elevate those kinds of things, we know that bright people, intelligent people report about 25% greater rates of anxiety compared to the national average. And I truly believe it's because of these differences in perceiving the world, which come from the being wired differently. So we find kids, especially gifted kids, where they can get stuck in that negative cycle, that fear cycle, that anxiety cycle. When the sympathetic nervous system is activated and elevated levels of cortisol actually rewire the brain circuits where emotional networks cycle. And you know that when our amygdala, you know, sounds the alarm, and we have the reptile brain or the old brain kind of raising its heads going alarm, 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 that shuts down the logical sequential thinking of the prefrontal cortex. And so now we have in charge this old emotional brain, and we know that those 3 major areas, go-to areas, are flight, fright, and freeze. And flight, oh my goodness, I can't say it today. Fight, flight, and freeze. And these responses become kind of hardwired into some of our gifted children's brain, because it's like having a broken thermostat. So if we have a broken thermostat, our heat may kick on, right, when it's not supposed to. It's already hot, but that keeps kicking on because our thermostat's broken. And that can happen in our gifted children's brains. It can kind of break down like a thermostat breaks down. And the more stress and the more often that we're going into that emotional brain and shutting down the prefrontal cortex, the more often it happens. And we literally have to rewire that part of our brain through therapy and behavioral analysis and techniques to do that. So we have to keep in mind that many of the students who are experiencing COVID have been experiencing other stressors, real or imagined, and this is just one more straw on the camel's back. And this may be the straw that actually becomes very difficult for kids to deal with. So that different wiring also leads to asynchronous development. So most kids have a pretty smooth transition through childhood, but families of intellectually gifted children often have a different experience, because these children experience a greater discrepancy between cognitive, social, emotional, physical, both gross motor and fine motor development. And so if we look back, this has been noted since Rita Hollingsworth, who is kind of the mother of gifted education in 1942. You know, she noticed that to have the intelligence of an adult and the emotions of a child combined in a childish body is to encounter certain difficulties. And we also know that the Columbus group, with in 1991 proposed, a federal definition of giftedness, which we see here on the slide, and basically called it out. Giftedness is asynchronous development in which advanced cognitive abilities and heightened intensity combine to create inner experiences and awareness that are qualitatively different from the norm. This asynchrony increases with higher intellectual capacity. The uniqueness of the gifted renders them particularly vulnerable and requires modifications in parenting, teaching, and counseling for them to develop optimally. Stephanie Tolan followed up with asynchronous development research and basically said that development puts the gifted person outside the normal developmental patterns from birth. And that asynchronous development can change the dynamics in a family, in a school community, in a classroom. So we have to remember that if we're looking at COVID and its impact on asynchronous development, these are kids that may be able to cognitively and intellectually understand what's going on, but their emotional or social skills may be delayed, maybe not even at age level, but under their current age level, and they may not understand the feelings that come along with that. And they may have very intense feelings of fear that come along with that. All right, perfectionism, my very favorite topic, right? So perfectionism, we found, really is a part of being gifted. And I don't understand how the hardwiring of the brain leads to perfectionism, but that we know that perfectionism is a part of almost 90% of our gifted children, the population of our gifted children. And that need for achievement, there's that product perfectionism, and that need for achievement doesn't allow for mistakes. They have high expectations for themselves and for others. You'll know these kids by the kids who erase and erase and erase until there's a hole in the page, or they're doing their homework and you walk in and there is 50 pieces of crumpled paper on the floor because they've started over and over and over again. These are kids that they, at a young age, they're not really challenged a whole lot. And so they don't really learn to face challenges. And then when they hit that challenge later, it can be very difficult for them. And those are the kids sometimes that become the procrastinators, because if I'm challenged and I wait to the last minute, then I have an excuse for not, being perfect. Oh, well, I only spent 5 minutes on it, so of course it's not perfect. Of course it's not my best work. So procrastination tends to come hand in hand with that perfectionism as well. So people that are perfectionists, whether they are young people or old people, they're successful in spite of their perfectionism, not because of their perfectionism. Perfectionism can be very damaging, and it really lies more on an anxiety disorder continuum. So if we look at perfectionism and break it down, it's the combination of a desire to be perfect, a fear of imperfection, and an emotional conviction that perfection is the route to personal acceptability. So if we really have to name this, it is a self-esteem issue, and it is an anxiety disorder. I used to, in the old days, stand up and do the Vanna White thing, right? On one hand, there's healthy perfectionism. On the other hand, there's unhealthy perfectionism. But I'm here to tell you, there is no such thing as healthy perfectionism. And I'll be honest, the reason I'm in front of you today is because my perfectionism was debilitating, and it took me 42 years to overcome that. And as I retired from my school district, I said, I have to, this is my calling. I have to help other students, kids, individuals overcome their perfectionism before they're 42 years old. And so it does, sometimes perfectionism is an extreme and it requires therapy. Other times perfectionism is such an extreme that it requires therapy and medication. So it is not something that is to be taken lightly. Let's look at a couple reasons for perfectionism. We've had several studies that looked at, the oldest child is expected to be perfect, or the children of alcoholics or workaholics become perfect to smooth things over. That's their role in the family. The other perfectionistic research was done by gifted people and basically found that it is just inborn for some of our gifted kids. You can have gifted kids that parents are laissez-faire. No, no high expectations for their kids, but their kids are still big perfectionists. And so even though we don't know exactly why, we do find that this is a condition that is present in many, many of our gifted students. And perfectionism can be both inward, I have to be perfect, but it can also be kind of an outward or environmental type of perfectionism. How many of you know students who kind of plan their day out, right? This is going to happen first, this is going to happen second, this is going to happen third, and then one thing doesn't happen the way they expected it to. There's a fire drill, or something is interrupting a subject they're going to have, and all of a sudden their day is ruined, or they have a meltdown, or they can't adjust to that change. That's because they're perfectionists and they planned that perfect day and then it didn't happen. So if we look at COVID's impact on perfectionists, right, we are seeing the exacerbation of already very high levels of stress and distress because perfectionists are so vulnerable, and there's this uncertainty. Perfectionists love to control everything. They control their environment, they control their performance, they try to control the other people around them. And now we have this thing that is causing uncertainty in every single area of their lives. It's causing uncertainty in how they do their schoolwork. It's causing uncertainty in their homes and whether their parents work or not. It's causing uncertainty in how instruction is delivered. So this pervasive uncertainty for a perfectionist is very stressful and can become traumatic for them. So often perfectionists are going to engage in maladaptive behaviors, and they're going to be things that actually worsen their perfectionism. And you might find them overcompensating, as well as completely withdrawing from school, from home, from life, from friendships, from relationships. One of the things that I love to use is this poster, because I think what we really need to do is cultivate that growth mindset and cultivate that shift in perspective so that we're striving for excellence rather than trying to be perfectionistic. I really want you to take a minute and read through this. I hate reading to you, so I'd love for you to take a minute and just read through this poster and then tell me which side you would like to live on, the excellence side or the perfectionism side. You can just type it in your chat box. Yeah, I see a lot of people that would really rather live on the excellence side. If you'd like this in the 8.5 by 11 picture, you can just email me and I'll send it to you so that you can print it as kind of a mini poster for your kiddos or for yourself. Okay. So now we're looking at anxiety and stress, and both asynchrony and perfectionism can lead us to anxiety and stress. Keep in mind just the label alone of being gifted carries with it a great weight of expectation for success. So we really need to help kids learn to balance that expectation. We, as teachers, we need to provide a safety net that, you know, is a compassion for failures and mistakes and mishaps. And that compassion leads to helping kids have a growth mindset and develop resilience. It's very important to provide an outlet for kids to communicate about their anxiety and their fears. And one of the best things that we can do as the professionals that work with them is to make sure that we really listen to them. And a lot of these kids think that they're alone in this. You would be surprised when you have like a group of students and you open it up to talk about some of these issues that will come right out and say, I thought I was the only one that thought this way. I didn't know anybody else felt like this. And so being a compassionate listener and giving them that opportunity and letting them know they're not alone is something that really helps them. So what are some of the things that we do that, you know, just, it's self-imposed stress. So some of our kids set excessively high standards for themselves, and they're very worried about, you know, as I see kids in my private practice, they're really worried about their teachers finding out they're not actually gifted. I can't ask my teacher a question because it might be a dumb question, and my teacher would know I'm not actually gifted and I would be pushed out of the class. So they set really high standards for themselves, and they really want people to think highly of them. There is a great fear of failure, but sometimes there's a fear of success, because if I do show I'm perfect, then I'll be expected to always be perfect. So it's a very fine line that they walk. They have a lot of negative self-talk and a lot of self-criticism. They are their own worst critic. Sometimes they have very emotionally loaded beliefs about themselves. They also want to be loved, respected, and praised by everyone. And even though they may have 10 people in a day give them love, respect, and praise, one person might have a negative evaluation, not even of them, but of forgetting to put a period after a sentence or something very minor. But what happens is they focus in on that one negative qualification and they forget about all of the other positive ones. They tend to catastrophize, and there's a lot of worrying going on. Not only do they have those high expectation types of stress, but gifted kids tend to be existential beings. And what happens is they're more unique than their neurotypical peers, and they begin to have existential stress, right? The global concerns. Look what's happening just right now. We have a hurricane hitting. We have the fires in California. We have 2 million songbirds dropping dead in the air to the ground, and we have COVID-19. How are we expecting our kids to be able to deal with the world that we as adults are leaving them to grow up in? Of course, along with that comes with cognitive dissonance, right? The idealism. This is the way I see the world should be, but this is the way it actually is. There's huge cognitive dissonance right now. There's a lot of anger. I have one young lady in her senior year who dropped out last week, is going to get her GED because she can't wait to do something about the environment. She can't wait to graduate high school because the adults around her are not doing anything, and she's angry. She is angry at all the adults in the world, and she is going to do something about it and can't wait to finish high school. There's also a sense of isolation because, as this particular young lady, she doesn't feel like anybody else cares. And so a lot of our gifted children are like that. They have this incredible cognitive dissonance, and they don't feel like anybody else cares about. They need meaning in their lives. They need to have a purpose. And that we found from positive psychology, there are 5 areas that transcend cultures, gender, ages, that individuals need to be happy. One is just to have positive emotions on a daily basis. One is to have engagement, something that they're really involved in and they feel good about. One is relationships. One is achievement or accomplishment of some kind. But there's a big M in there, and that's the need for meaning, doing something that's meaningful. So we know that that is something that's needed not just for gifted students, but for everybody, but especially for gifted students. They are looking for meaning and purpose for their lives. So when we have that kind of stress, both the self-imposed stress, the existential stress, we have a combination for disaster for some of our gifted kids. You know, you might find underachievement in some. You definitely are going to find some anxiety disorders, whether they're a generalized anxiety disorder, or it may be a separation anxiety disorder, some fear disorders, some panic disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress, depression, and psychosomatic disorders. I have one client who's doing really well now, but had a gastrointestinal problem that just puzzled every person she went to. And she ended up in 3 different children's specialty hospitals before her pediatrician sent her to me with these gastrointestinal problems that they could not figure out. And it was anxiety. It was an overload of stress that was causing her gastrointestinal problems. So it is something that we have to pay close attention to. And if a child does not have an outlet to speak about what they're experiencing in terms of levels of anxiety and stress, it could turn into something that puts them in a hospital. And there's nothing a hospital can do for them because it's really not a health issue. It's a mental health issue. So we really need to stay in touch with our students, even though we're mostly online. We need to stay in touch with them. We need to provide them with individual opportunities to speak to us about their anxiety. And we need to be aware of those long-term consequences of anxiety. And since every person has a unique brain and physiology, there are a lot of different strategies that have to be tried because not one size fits all. I'm going to give you several strategies, but some may fit some students and some may not, and you'll need other strategies. And we want to make sure that we're incorporating strategies that make healthy minds and healthy bodies, and that we're using strategies that help these systems to interact with each other. So let's look at a couple of techniques to manage anxiety. One of my favorite books and workbooks now is by Dan Peters, and he puts his books are called From Warrior to Warrior, and they're published by Gifted Unlimited, and they are thinking strategies that work really well with gifted kids. And so the 4 steps that he uses is, number 1, being able to identify the thought. What is the worry? Right? And helping kids to name it, right? Will someone in my family get sick from COVID-19? Or if there's somebody already sick, will someone in my family die? Or will my parents ever go to work again? Will we have enough money to pay the rent or to buy groceries? And then challenging the thought, right? So because sometimes the fears are realistic, sometimes they're not realistic, sometimes they're a little bit exaggerated. But what we want to try to do with kids is help them to challenge the thought. Do I have evidence to support what I'm thinking? And so using data, using scientific research, help them to show that if everybody's following the CDC guidelines, right, that most people recover fully if they do get sick, or that not everybody gets sick, and help them to modify the thought into a rational science or research-based thought. So then they can replace it if my family and I follow CDC guidelines and what the government is asking us to do, there's a low chance that someone in my family will get sick and die or so forth. So using those strategies, and he has a wonderful workbook to go along with that I recommend. There's a lot of teachers that use the From Warrior to Warrior guides for their students and to recommend to parents. Stress is cumulative. If we add small stress on small stress on small stress, even though they may be small things, that accumulation may turn into a trauma response. I had to stop watching the news because I felt like I was in a traumatic state of being after watching the news over and over and over again. And there are a lot of different things that contribute to that trauma response. So if you have one of these bulleted items happen to you, you may have an adaptive response, right? I had to move. Okay, that's the only thing that happened. It may take me a little while to transition, but I'll probably respond in a pretty good way. But if I had some of these responses, these bulleted events happen to me over and over again, then I might develop a maladaptive response because it's becoming traumatic for me. And I'm stuck in that old brain in fight, flight, or freeze. And so if you have kids, and even if they haven't had somebody personal experience COVID, I have had several friends now in other states that have experienced COVID, but I haven't had anybody in my general area. So you may have kids that don't know anybody that's actually had COVID or it's impacted their lives through sickness or hospitalization. But it's hard to keep from hearing about it. It's hard to ignore the death rates that happen on the news every day. And so now we see that number of deaths growing, and we're talking about growing that number exponentially by January. Now we have trauma with a capital T. And think about it, we're adults with adult coping mechanisms, but what is that doing to our students? So important that we consider that some of our students may be having a traumatic response to the COVID-19 and all of its accompanying events that are happening. Oops, let me go back one. Okay, so think about this. There are two types of trauma that can happen to a person: physical trauma and mental trauma. Physical trauma includes the body's response to serious injury and threat of injury. And mental trauma includes frightening thoughts and painful feelings. They are the mind's response to serious injury. Mental trauma can produce strong feelings, and it can also produce extreme behaviors, such as intense fear or helplessness, withdrawal or attachment, detachment, lack of concentration, irritability, sleep disturbance, aggression, hypervigilance, and even flashbacks. So if we're thinking about the response of fear, there are so many different fears that a kid could have right now. We went through some of those, that somebody gets very, very sick, or someone dies, or someone loses their home because they can't pay rent or they can't buy groceries. I had a student last spring, after we had gone to, we'd already gone to online learning, and she was just in a traumatic state. She came to her session. We have Zoom sessions now, but she came to her session and she said, I just can't do school anymore. I can't do it. She said, I have to write about COVID in English. I have to calculate percentage of positive cases which result in death in math. I have to learn about viruses and what spreads viruses in science. And in social studies, I had to learn about the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. She just was surrounded by this fear in every aspect of her school day. And so I don't know what the reasoning behind that teaching was, but she had just been traumatized and she was in a traumatic state and she really could not attend school anymore. So if we look at this trauma, the pandemic trauma is amplified because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know when we're going to get a vaccination. We don't know when it's going to end. People are emotionally and physically exhausted. And things are amped up. And so our normal overexcitability reactions, like our emotional overexcitability, we are really frightened. And for our sights and sounds and our central overexcitability, we're having intense experiences in that overexcitability as well. So everything has been amplified by the pandemic. If we look at the trauma associated with COVID-19, the pandemic trauma, it's mostly fear of loss, right? And we have people who are having birthdays and they can't see family members, or we have people who are in hospice and we're not allowed to see them, and grandparents or other relatives. We can't travel from state to state to see our family. So it's not just loss in terms of death, but it's loss in terms of social relationships, family relationships, being separated from family. And then the other losses that we've had, we've lost our ability to travel and vacation. We've lost our ability to be safe in public environments. So this fear, this loss is really the hallmark of what's happening for most of our kids right now. And their fear is happening and occurring with very strong emotions. Everybody's trauma experience is different. So if a child has had other traumas throughout their life, maybe they've already lost a loved one, even a loved pet, maybe there's been a divorce and they've had to leave their home or change schools. So we have to look at accumulation and how kids see each of those traumatic experiences. So on a continuum, every student that you have may be experiencing this trauma in a different way. And some of them may not be having a traumatic experience. I know I probably have a skewed perspective because all my clients are gifted and they're all highly intense. And so most of them are experiencing trauma in some way. But the ones that are experiencing it more deeply and more severely are those kids who have already had personal crisis experiences in their lives. And so it's very important for you to know your students and to know their history in order to be there for them. It will take time for them to move through this because it's a process. And I think that the more that we can do as educators to help them, the better it's going to be for these students, because their parents right now, I think most of the parents that I'm working with are totally at the end of their ropes. They have been trying to work from home and school from home and keep families going, and some of them have 2, 3, 4, 5 children in the home, and they're just at the end of their emotional capability. And so teachers are going to be the trusted adults that our students are going to lean on in terms of being able to process this trauma. some of the things that you might see and the reactions to trauma are shock, fear, guilt, grief, confusion, shame, anger, and depression. These are all kind of red flags that you should be on the lookout for when you're working with your students. Sometimes these are closely linked, and they're pretty difficult to separate. Where does grief begin and anger end? It's very hard to tell. Sometimes kids have a hard time talking about their feelings, either because the asynchrony makes it hard for them to put it all together, or because they believe they may be burdening you with their response, with their desire to talk about it. They also want to blame somebody. They really want to hold somebody accountable for this. And that desire to retaliate in some way can be very strong. There is no concrete enemy here other than the virus itself, which is very difficult for kids because they want to have something to blame and have somebody to be angry about. And so we have to try to help them find ways to direct their anger and some of the other strong emotions in socially and psychologically healthy ways. And some things that you might see or parents might see are behavior outbursts, sometimes without a cause, sleep problems, aggression problems, disobedience from otherwise obedient kids that you've never seen them be disobedient before, and kind of a pervasive depression. I've had a few kids that were so angry with their online schooling, not the schooling itself or the delivery of instruction, but the problems with technology, that they've literally broken computers because they're just in an angry state and nothing's working for them and they want to be in school. And so this can come out, this aggressive behavior can come out for kids who are dealing with this very challenging time. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the basic PH coping styles, which were developed by Comallie-Caplan. As I was studying trauma and stress, I came across this model, and what really struck me is that it very closely aligns with Dabrowski's overexcitabilities and helps us to understand how kids might be coping with the trauma and the stress using those systems. So let me kind of walk you through this. Remember, so basic PH is the BASIC and then the physiological. So belief, affect, social, imagination, cognitive, and physiological. And if we're looking at overexcitabilities, we look at central, emotional, imaginational, intellectual, and psychomotor. So the first way we might find kids who are coping, it might be a belief system, right? And so it might be that the child is coping relying on their core values, and the values are incorporated from adults that are important to the child. Many times you'll see, I know that not in school, but at home, that some of those values are derived and have meaning through religion or spirituality. And so kids rely on that belief system to get them through stress and trauma. So I think that there's not a direct alignment with Dabrowski's overexcitabilities in this particular coping style, but I do think it can kind of layer over the central overexcitability, which also doesn't have an alignment with the pH, the basic pH. But if we look at the central overexcitability, we look at aesthetic pleasures, right? And we have that kid that has, you know, those intense pleasure experiences. If they're surrounded by the things that they find pleasurable, excuse me a moment. Excuse me. Okay. So they might find things that increase connections and decrease isolation in this area, and be able to cope with something that's unpleasant through the things that they find extremely pleasant. And I think this might be a good time for me to take and for you to stand up and stretch a 3-minute break so I can get a quick drink and get my voice back. So please take 3 minutes and I'll be right back with you.
Are you okay, Lori?
Yeah, my throat just kind of closed up on me for a minute.
Okay. All right.
Has it been about 3 minutes? You think everybody's got a stretch?
Yeah, I think you're good.
Okay. So sorry about that. Excuse me, people, for doing that. Okay. We'll jump right back in then. Excuse me. Okay, moving on. Another one of the coping styles has to do with affect, which includes our feelings and emotions. And we want to make sure that we're looking at the opportunity for these kids who have this coping style to be able to share those anxieties, those fears, and to provide those those opportunities to do that. Another one is the social. And so these are kids that are going to seek support and control through the structure of their relationships. And providing some time outside of the classroom. I know that most of the schools aren't doing any of their extracurriculars right now because of the way things are. But what I'm finding is that the students that I'm working with are craving those non-classroom times with their peers to be able to talk about some of these things. And so some of my older students have gone to their classes and said, is anybody interested in doing a, for language arts, a book discussion group for whatever we're reading in literature, or a science group that's outside of class. And they set up their own Zoom times, and they seek out that like-minded peer to talk about some of these things and to decrease their isolation. So when we look at affect and social coping styles, it really aligns well with the emotional overexcitability, because these kids are the kids that they're acutely aware of their feelings. We know that they have complex emotions, and they have that capacity for very deep relationships, and they value those relationships tremendously. And these are the kids that really need to have a connection with, whoever is that one person, that one go-to person in their life, or that one or two go-to people in their life. They can be very at risk as well, because they feel things so very deeply. And so we need to really keep an eye on our emotional kids. Even though that's probably the way that they're going to process, they still are at risk for depression or existential depression. The coping style of imagination also is closely aligned with our imaginational. So when we look at the basic PH model, we know that kids frequently turn to creativity as their method for coping with that trauma. And it's important to allow opportunities for that to happen, whether it's online class or in-person class. The kids that cope in this way need to have opportunities to use their imagination. And they may include things like music composition, or visual arts, or performing arts, or even inventive science. Those are the things that our imaginational overexcitable kids are going to need to help cope with what's happening in their world today. And then in the basic PH, there's the cognitive, and they use a cognition-based coping style. And this is for these kids, literature might be a really good way for them to process. One of my favorite books is Some of My Best Friends Are Books, also published by Gifted Unlimited. And there are, it's split by categories, how to help, books that are basically bibliotherapy to help kids with anxiousness, with stress, with feelings of isolation. And so using that aligns very well with the intellectual overexcitable kids who are looking for information to help them process the trauma, whether it is reading or videos, podcasts, blogging, YouTube. They're looking for an information processing. Okay, whoops, excuse me. Let me go back one. Also, we know that that intellectual overexcitable kid has the kind of side effect of having the risk for existential depression. And so these are kids that we may have to tone it down, maybe not have them watch quite as much news, or learn quite as much, because that cognitive dissonance that can occur in the intellectual overexcitable kid can create that existential depression. And when existential depression goes on for too long, it can turn into pathological depression. And so we have to be really careful about that. And we have to find ways to help kids who are existentially depressed. And I will talk to you a little bit more about that as we get into some of the practical solutions. And the final coping style we might find is the physiological from the basic PH. And this is using physical activity, hands-on types of problem-based learning, types of instruction. And and the ability to have activity, and it closely aligns with, of course, our psychomotor overexcitable kids, because they have boundless energy. They have that need for intense physical energy. So these are kids that would do well to take walks, to take hikes, to do exercise. And we need to allow for that physical or verbal activity. One of the things that I'm finding from the students that I work with as clients is that they don't feel like they have enough opportunity for the verbal activity, because their classes, they only have, and I'm talking about my district, not your district, but they only have very few classes where teachers are telling them how to do the assignment and explaining the assignment, and that's it. And then the rest of the week is doing the assignment. So there's not a lot of discussion going on, especially between, the highly verbal, highly communicative, gifted kids, and they're missing that opportunity, and they're really feeling like they're not getting enough out of their instruction because they don't have that opportunity for verbal activity with their like-minded peers. And so trying to build some of that into instruction would be very important. Okay, so I want to stop just for a moment and see if there are any questions that people want to ask before we start talking about practical things. Are there any questions that I can answer? And you can unmute yourself and ask a question during this time, since we're pausing for questions. Nope. What do they say? Speak now or forever hold your peace? No, not really. You can ask a question at any time. All right, we'll move into the practical then.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Do you have any websites that you would recommend for, gifted social emotional learning for students to access?
Probably the one, I think Hoagie's Gifted. Are you familiar with Hoagie's Gifted?
Yes, and we have Sang Gifted as well, the website, but I didn't know if there were any additional ones that you might.
Hoagie's is likely to lead you to additional websites more than probably anywhere else is. But if you will, just put your email in the chat box with that question. I'll make sure that I follow up and send you some.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. But Hoagie's is my go-to place when I need something for kids. Anybody else? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to talk about COVID with your gifted students. You want to make sure you meet them where they are, and in order to do that, of course, we're going to ask an open-ended question like, what do you want to know about it, or what do you already know about it? We have to be careful to be developmentally appropriate, but keep in mind that asynchronous development and where your kids are at. You may have a group of students that you're talking to, and some are, conversing more at a high school level, and others are actually conversing under their age level emotionally. Make sure that you are gathering accurate information, and boy, is that hard right now because it changes almost every day. Our governor has new information out almost on a weekly basis, and I have to monitor that very carefully in order to provide accurate information. If there are rumors or false information, then you probably are going to have to correct that, but make sure you correct it with facts, not your own opinion. And we know that kids get COVID, and before it was thought maybe they don't even get it, but they do get it, and some kids do have adverse health effects, but for the most part, they are minimal significant health effects, and we can help reassure kids by letting them know that. But the biggest thing of all is to be able to allow them to ask questions, express their concerns, and especially express the feelings that they're having regarding the situation. And every student may have different feelings, and none of them should be discounted. Okay, teachers can help. Let's dive into some practical things. First of all, you're a model. Great. and their parents are a model. And how you manage your emotions is going to be how the kids are going to take their cues, right? They're very emotionally, they're exquisitely connective and sensitive to the adults around them, and they look for every clue, and they read those clues, whether they are whether they're nonverbal language, whether they're verbal language. Kids are very closely monitoring how you're reacting to this. So being able to keep calm is one of the most important things that you can do. The other thing is make sure you're taking care of yourselves. You can't take care of anybody else. I know this has become very cliche, put your own oxygen mask on first, but it really is the truth. If you aren't taking care of yourself, if you at your own wits end, it's going to be very difficult to stay calm. It's going to be very difficult to hide fears and feelings that you might have. And try to be optimistic. It's difficult in today's day and age. I've been keeping pretty optimistic until all the songbirds fell out of the sky. And then I had one of those moments and I'm like, the fire, the this, the that, is this the apocalypse, right? So I know even for an adult, it's really difficult during these hard times to stay optimistic, but it's the best thing that you can do for yourself and for your students. So having a sense of humor through all of this, if you can, is very important. Opening up for conversations. I know that you probably don't have the amount of instructional time that you need during these times, let alone additional time to talk to your children and provide some social emotional space for them. But if you can, it is one of the best things that you can do. And if you have individual check-in time that you can do with your students, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes per student, it's really important that you can listen to them and pay attention to how they're feeling. We know that suicide rates have gone up. I haven't seen any specific research separating out the suicide rates of bright individuals versus not neurotypical individuals, but I suspect because our gifted kids are thinking about things in with such depth and complexity, that probably our gifted suicide rates are going up, if not the same, even more. So it's important for somebody to be paying attention and kind of checking in on them. We want to make sure that you are sticking to the facts when you talk to them, and taking into consideration that cognition is at different levels, and that means that you may have to talk with small groups that you handpick. Okay, this group kind of is like-minded and about the same place. This group is in another place. I might need to separate these groups out and talk to them. Make sure you're using age-appropriate terms, and let them know they're not alone in this. Normalize their feelings. It's also important that you do as much to keep things normal. That can be the most calming, reassuring thing that we can do. And I know that everything is unpredictable, but if you can help students set up a schedule and they follow the schedule and they have some routine in their life, that will be helpful. If you have had these students before, some of you follow your students, I think, or you have groups or clusters of students from one grade to the next. If you are doing some of the same things that you were able to do with them prior to this happening, and including some sense of normalcy, that is something that teachers can really do to help their students. Do lessons on resiliency, right? Focus on people who have resilience. Have them read about people, maybe not biographical or autobiographical people in COVID, but other difficult times and how they were able to move through that. how they coped, what happened when they were frightened or upset. So if you can incorporate some lessons about other crises and people moving through them successfully with resilience, that can be very helpful to students. And when we talk about, normalcy, play, kids need to play. I think Katrina should do a workshop on some of the games that she's been doing online with her students and helping them to maintain a healthy balance in their life, because they're still playing, they're still enjoying their time as a young person. And self-expression, whether it is that using that creativity, art, music, journal, or poetry writing, this is a time that most of my kids that I see as clients have started journals, and the writing is exquisite and it's deep and it's profound, and that is helping them to move through this. So if you have a way to do that as a teacher through your instruction and some kind of self-expression, that will also be extremely helpful to your students during this time. Now, here's one piece of how we help that existential depression, right? When the world is not as good as you envision the world should be, we get that cognitive dissonance. So if we can help kids to find a way they can help, it will help that so much. So if we can assist them in finding things that they can do, maybe we organize letter writing to first responders, right? Thank you notes to first responders, or online fundraisers for people who cannot buy their groceries or cannot buy PPE. Maybe it's individual donating to a food pantry, checking in on people who are older in their neighborhood and maybe leaving them a basket with maybe homemade cookies or a poem that they've written or something like that. So if they can find a way to make the world a little bit better place, whether it's within their family, within their school, within their neighborhood, within their community, it's going to make a difference for them in seeing that something can be done, finding meaning and purpose in their lives, and helping push away that existential depression. So we have, I wanted to bring up the 5 key principles of psychological first aid, because this is something that you as teachers need to provide to your students. How do you keep them mentally healthy during this time? And of course, these things. They have to have a place to belong and a place they feel safe. And when it's online, it's a different situation. You have to feel a sense of safety in order to be able to share yourself in this way. It's difficult to share yourself in this way. And so establishing a safe place to share your feelings. Finding, and we're going to talk about some other ways, some ways to distress, reduce stress. So maybe we can do some opening activities that are calming activities. They're stress reduction activities. Building a sense of self and community efficacy. How do we build community when we're all in different places? But there are ways that we can do that and help to foster that connectedness, because in isolation, it's very difficult to keep that sense of hope. But when we are connected together and we're working as a unit, whether it's a classroom unit, a family unit, a neighborhood unit, we promote that sense of hope. All right, we're gonna hopefully go through some strategies that are based on cognitive behavioral strategies. I think that it's a very effective remedy because cognitive behavioral strategies focus on that mind-body connection. So it's that integration of practice. Mindfulness also focuses on self-compassion, which help to reduce the levels of anxiety, and it gives you a greater understanding of yourself and others. We're going to talk a little bit about breathing exercises and how that calms the parasympathetic nervous system. Remember, we don't want to turn off the prefrontal cortex by staying in that, that frightened flight or freeze response and emotional brain. We really want to get our prefrontal cortex back online. And so the more that we can decrease anxiety and stress, the more we're going to be able to think in a way that's calm. And the more we're going to be able to use our imaginations and our creativity to keep us, you know, a healthy mind and body experience. So I want to be the dog, not the person. The other thing is mindfulness is one of the ways that we almost cure perfectionism. I won't go quite so far as to say cure, but it is a great strategy for dealing with perfectionism. If we're perfectionists, we spend a lot of our time beating ourselves up for mistakes we made in the past, or worrying about the mistakes that we're going to make in the future. And being mindful keeps us in the moment. And so if we're a perfectionist and we're doing the past and future thinking, right, we can get stuck and disappointed and frustrated. But if we're practicing mindfulness, it helps us to stay in the moment so that we're not doing the past, future. We give ourselves permission to be imperfect and to just be happy in the moment. And so that is one of the ways, I think one of the best ways that we can use mindfulness. And there are 4 ways I think that you can use mindfulness in the classroom. First of all, breathing, right? Breath is just concentrating on breath. And there are so many different types of breathing exercises. Whether you want to use one of the YouTube videos to keep your kids engaged with, you know, doing mindfulness through breath, or whether you want to do your own through breath, but breathing helps you to focus in on the moment. The other one might be a sensory experience, and whether that is something that you taste or you touch, you can do mindfulness through and you could do eating mindfulness and ask every child to have a piece of food. It doesn't matter whatever they have is fine, because you're going to ask them to notice the texture, the taste, how long it lingers, and you're going to focus completely on that experience. You can do mindfulness through guided imagery. And I may take you through that in a moment, where you're just focused in on one particular concept or place or feeling. You can do mindfulness through movement, and children's yoga is a great way to do mindfulness through movement. But one important piece of mindfulness is reflection and sharing the experience. And so whatever type of mindfulness you choose to use in the classroom, it's important to follow it with a sharing of that experience, and just having kids reflect and talk about their experience. Here we go. So we want to think more about the existential stress, which many of our gifted kids are experiencing right now. And here's a few more ways that we can do that. We can help them to learn about world events, not necessarily COVID, but other world events and the process of change, and how people, individuals, can bring about change, that not everything is helpless or hopeless. We can still do service learning projects online. And so we can model compassion as a family or a classroom. Many kids are, especially at the high school level, are searching right now for, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with my life so that I make a difference? Because I don't like the world as it is, and I want to make a difference. So looking for those careers that help address deep concerns, and even helping them find, as young kids, helping them to do some of that exploration in terms of climate change or wildlife management, or whatever the case may be that they're interested in, that might be a passion area for them. It's important to find, and I'm not sure how your district is doing this. Our district is doing a half an hour once a week where the gifted teacher puts their like-minded peers together in a room to do some sorts of activity, so there's still some time where they get together and develop some relationships. bibliotherapy, cinema therapy, can be great ways where you can do book clubs with your kids, or you can all watch a movie separately, but then come together and discuss the concepts and the concerns that were brought up in a particular movie. Mentoring is extremely successful to help kids through times like this. So depending on what their area is, if you can hook them up with a mentor, and I don't know if your school system already has mentors in place that have been vetted, no. So that might be something that you can help parents to help their students, so that the vetting is done by the parents, but help them to understand what mentors do, how they might find a mentor in their own world of friends that can help the student. So it's another adult that helps students share their concerns and passions. And other activities you might be able to do online. I know that now they're doing like Destination Imagination online. So I'm sure that some of the other activities, maybe Future Problem Solving, has an online component to it. But getting kids together in order to provide change is extremely important during this time. Another wonderful thing is stream of consciousness writing, or for some kids, drawing. And some kids really love to do this in a way that is maybe prompted. So you might do a prompt and then let them just go from there. Or you might just give an event or a character in a book, and just let them write. And there's no grading. It doesn't have to be punctuated. It is just letting a person's feelings come out. And many kids like to do this as drawing or cartooning, and just allowing them to get that feeling out. This is from a program called Go Zen. And they have many different programs. They're excellent programs. They are written for kids. They have really horrible animation, and every gifted kid will tell you this is the worst animation ever, but the lessons are wonderful. And they have several different modules. This one comes from a Go Strengths model, and then they have a Go Zen model, which is an anti-anxiety. They have an OCD model. They have a growth mindset module. So they have many different things, and they have, it's for parents or teachers or counselors. And some of their things are free, and you can go on their website and download posters and different videos. The whole program does have a cost, but there are many free things that are available. This one's called the ETR model. And it's teaching kids that when you face an event, you generally have some automatic ideas that pop into your head, and that your reactions come from those thoughts. And if you change your thoughts, you can change your reactions. And so, for instance, if, let me think of an adult. If I was standing in a grocery store and I'm waiting in line to pay, and a cart falls, bumps into me, and I feel the cart from behind me kind of crash into my back, I could think, what a jerk. And I might turn around and go, watch where you're going. Or if that cart crashed into me and I heard a little, oh, just that one little change, I might think, oh no, somebody tripped or somebody fell. And my reaction would be, are you okay? So the same thing occurred, but my thought determined how I reacted to that. So helping kids to understand that if they can change their thoughts, they can change their reactions. So when they're having a thought that is either a fearful thought or an angry thought or a frustrated thought, if you can help them to see the event in a different way, help them to change the way they're thinking about it, then you can also change their reaction about it. So the EATR model, which they like to call it, the EDR model can be very good when kids are stuck in a cognitive distortion and they're not thinking about things in a way that's productive or helpful to them. So I just said that, cognitive distortion. And with the kids, I call them thought holes. And this is a really important lesson to teach kids. And so these are adult terms. There are some kid terms that you can use that Gozen uses, and they use thought holes instead of cognitive distortions. And they talk to kids about falling into thought holes. So one of them is filtering. So if in kid terms, they call it keyholing, right? And so if I were looking through a keyhole and I looked into a room, but all I saw was my ice cream cone had fallen on the floor, but I didn't see my mom had already gotten another ice cream cone. My sister's ready to clean up my ice cream cone. My favorite ice cream is in the cone. My favorite chair is waiting for me to sit in. And all I saw was the ice cream cone on the floor. I could say, oh, this is the worst day of my life. This is awful. Because all I'm seeing is that one negative aspect and magnifying it so that it filters out all the positive things that are happening. Another thing is black or white thinking, or all or nothing thinking. And our gifted kids tend to do that a lot. It's everyone or everything or every time or no one or nothing. And so those all come out of being perfectionist, right? And so either we're perfect or we're a failure. And that's why perfectionism is so bad, right? There is no such thing as perfect. There is no such thing as ultimate perfection. So every time we set ourselves up to be perfect, we actually fail because there's no in between. So all or nothing thinking can be very damaging, and helping kids to see the gray is extremely important. We can overgeneralize. In this one, it's like, okay, on my first biology quiz, I was sick the night before, I didn't study, and I got a D. Now, for every biology quiz that comes, I think I'm going to get a D or an F. I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail no matter what, because I already know I failed that first one. So I'm going to fail every one that comes. And so we're taking a single piece of evidence and making it go on forever. Jumping to conclusions, for kids, we call it leapfrogging, right? So let's say a teacher stops me as I'm walking into the classroom and says, hey, Lori, and the bell rings and the teacher says to me, hey, let's just talk after class. And so I go to my seat and I go, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong now? What did I do? If the teacher wants me to see her after class, I must have done something wrong. Maybe I got an F on my last assignment. And you're jumping to conclusions when it might have been that the teacher just wanted to ask me to join the debate team, right? It was something positive, but I'm leaping to negative conclusions. And that is also a thought hole or a cognitive distortion. Catastrophizing, well, in these day and ages, it's kind of hard not to catastrophize, right? But we need to help kids not catastrophize. And this is what ifing, right? What if this? What if that? What if this? What if? And so I'm going to give you a really good strategy for what ifing in just a moment. So it is, if we catastrophize, we're usually magnifying, but sometimes it can be minimizing too. It can be, I broke my arm, but I'm telling my mom there's nothing wrong with it because I don't want to have to go to the doctor. So we can go either way with minimizing or maximizing. And then personalization. I'm sure that you've experienced this yourself, but I have a student who will not, when we're in face-to-face class, will not walk across the courtyard during lunch and throw something in the trash, because she believes that everybody will see her and make a comment about what she's doing. She personalizes every look, every laugh, every whisper that she hears. And so she's stuck in this continual thought hole of personalization. And then blaming, I mean, obviously, if we're, if we have done something, we should take accountability for that. But many of us hold other people responsible. And that's another thought hole that you can fall into. Shoulds, don't should on me. You've heard that one before, right? Shoulds, shouldn'ts, we need to be careful about those. Those are kind of like all or nothing. They're ironclad rules about how we should behave or others should behave. And emotional reasoning is, in kids' terms, we call that mood easing. And it's just making a decision or a thought on what your mood is. Like, only people that get A's in AP government get into law school. I feel that only, or here's an even better one. I feel like I'm going to fail the test today. I just feel like I'm going to fail the test. So let's look at couple of ways to get kids out of thought holes, because thought holes are not a good place to be. The first one is called the big but tool. Now, it's really called the 3-to-1 positivity ratio tool, but most kids don't like that. They like to remember the big but tool, 4th grade humor, I guess. So when kids are having a negative statement, like, I feel I'm going to fail the test today, you must follow that with 3, and this is scientifically researched, you must follow that with 3 positives in order to turn that around. So I have them write the negative statement and then big buts. But I did study for 3 hours last night, but I got an A on my last test, even though I thought I wasn't going to do well. But I did all of the quizzes prior to this satisfactorily. When you follow a negative with 3 positives, it usually will turn something around. Now, if it's a relationship, you should know this. If it's a relationship that you're having negative thoughts about, the research shows it takes 5-to-1 to turn down a thought like, I think my teacher hates me. That would take 5 positive thoughts to turn around. The other really wonderful tool that works is what if you're what ifing and you're really in that kind of what if this happens? What if I fail that test today? Is worst, best, most likely. And this one is, you talk about what would be the worst case scenario. So if the thought was, what if I fail the test today? Most kids will go above and beyond to give you a worst case scenario. Well, I'll get an F in the class and then I won't pass. And then I might not have what I need to graduate, and then I won't get a scholarship. And so it goes on and on and on, and they catastrophize, right? And then most likely, right? And then best. What's the best possible thing that can happen? I get the best score in the class. It's so good. They move me right on to the next grade. Sometimes we get exaggerations on best case scenario. But then you go, what's most likely? And what comes into play is kind of that 3-to-1 positivity ratio tool, because they start thinking about, okay, I did study. I think I got most of the vocabulary terms in my head. I think the most likely thing to happen is worst. I'll probably get a B. I'll get a B or a B- on it. I think that's likely. Can you live with that? Can you live with the most likely scenario? Yeah, I can live with it. I'd rather have the best case scenario, but I can live with that most likely. And that will help get them out of that what ifing kind of thought hole that they're in. My kids really love these 2 tools and say they're the best tools and the tools that they use most often to get them out of that negative thinking or out of a thought hole. A little bit earlier, I talked to you about positive psychology and the 5 things that everybody needs to maintain satisfaction and happiness in their life. And they call it the PERMA model, P-E-R-M-A. And I use it as a journaling prompt, and kids come up with, at the end of each day, a positive emotion within the last 24 hours, a relationship, kind of a relationship scenario, 1 or 2 sentences that gave them positive emotions in the last 24 hours, an accomplishment or achievement that they made in the last 24 hours, something that they were engaged in. You know, Chick send me highest flow. Most kids don't know that, but that kind of that flow experience, kids will call it in the zone. I was in the zone when I was doing this, right? And so having that engagement to the point that we kind of lose track of time. And the meaning, right? When we're doing something that's not just for ourselves, but it's greater than just for ourselves. Even if that's, you know, I fed my cats today. You know, my cats would not be okay without feeding them. They need me. I have purpose in their lives. It could be something like that. It could be contributing to a class discussion that made things better. It could be volunteering, but something that gave them meaning. And what I tell them is, if you can't think of something in the last 24 hours, go back 34 hours or 36 hours, go back 72 hours, whatever the case may be, until they find something so that they can have a complete perma each day. The other thing that I discovered this summer when kids were having a really difficult time because there was a lack of structure is we did a backwards perma. And we planned a day with each one of these things in it. So they made sure they had planned something during the day that would give them positive emotions, something during the day where they would connect with somebody else, something during the day that they set a goal for to accomplish, something that they really enjoyed in terms of creativity or self-expression, and then of course something for others. So they began to structure their days using a perma, and it made a complete difference in their ability to, you know, lift the depression that they had, kind of decrease overall levels of anxiety, and find satisfaction and happiness in their life. So it is a great tool to use for that as well. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the VIA Institute. It is wonderful. It has lots of great things on it. It does have a strength survey, and all built on positive psychology, that the research is worldwide, so it transcends gender and age and culture and so forth. And there are 24 strengths that fall into 6 virtue areas. And what it is it's a free survey. Teachers can create an account and then have kids do their surveys, the youth surveys, under the teacher's account, so that you can get results on each of those. They do try to sell you a $10 complete report that's like a 20-page report at the end, and it tells you what movies to watch and what books to read. You don't need that. All you need is the free report. What it does is it probably takes kids about, depending on their reading skills, I would say I use it on 4th graders and up, and it's about 5 pages of 30 questions each, depending on reading level. Normally takes 20 to 40 minutes, but it gives you a report with all 24 strengths from the top all the way down to the least strength. And you can look at the top 5 as signature strengths. I use like the top 10. And one of the things that I use it for is journal prompting. So they either can do a perma or they can do a strength story, which means they take one of their top 10 strengths and they write how that strength was exhibited during that day or the day before. And so they become very self-aware of their strengths, which builds resiliency, right? And they're able to write about a very satisfactory experience based on one of their strengths. And so this is a great key to engagement and meaning, and it's a wonderful website. The other thing that, and I'm sure all of you have heard of this one, is an attitude of gratitude, right? And keeping kids reflecting on what they're grateful for in their lives. So when I work with kids on keeping their social emotional health in a good place, between our sessions, they have a choice of doing one of those 3 things. They do a perma, they do a strength story, or they do an attitude of gratitude entry into their journal. And that is writing 3 things they were grateful for that day. And it doesn't have to be a long thing, but at least 3 things that they were grateful for. And those 3 tools make a huge difference for kids. One of the things that we're finding is that kids are losing hope, right? And it's really important to recognize high hope individuals and how we can use the characteristics that they have and teach that to our students so they can become high hope individuals as well. So one of the things that we have found is they're able to set goals and they have flexibility, right? Watch out for the perfectionists, right? Because what they'll do is they'll set goals and then beat themselves up for not accomplishing the goals. So that flexibility piece is really important as well. And so one of the things that, oh, and I didn't put this in my slides, but I really love this, is I do a lot of scaling. And I think this is important, whether it's instructional achievement or it is achievement in a self-help goal or a self-awareness goal. So for instance, if I have a student that's a real procrastinator and they really want to improve that, they don't want to procrastinate anymore. So I ask them to put on a scale, what does a 0 look like? If you were at a 0 on procrastination, what would that look like? And they would probably tell me I wouldn't turn in anything. I would wait so long that the due date passed and I wouldn't turn in anything, right? And then I'll say, okay, if this were absolutely ideal and you made it to a 10, what would a 10 look like? And they would say, I'd start every assignment when I got it and I would turn them in as soon as I finished them, but always before the deadline. That would be my 10. And I'll say, well, where are you between that 0 and that 10? Where are you right now? And they would go, I think I hate to say this, but I'm at a 3. And I'll say, well, what does that look like? Well, I get about 25% of my assignments done on time. And that's about it. I'm really missing the ball. I've had pretty good teachers that keep extending the time for me, but I don't think that's helping. So, I think I'm about 25%. So I'll say to them, well, if you're at a 3, what would it look like to be a 4? And then they set a goal to be a 4, not to be a 10. They set a goal to be a 4. And we, I meet with them again and I say, well, where are you now? Well, I made that 4. Okay, well then what would it look like to be a 5? So we're not setting goals that, take a kid from changing overnight from a 3 to a 10, but helping them to be flexible and recognize success one tiny step at a time and teaching them how to set those is really important. We know that high hopers think more positively about themselves. Oh, there's one of my perfectionistic mistakes. Take a deep breath. It's just a mistake. It's okay. So we set higher goals and select more goals. They have a stronger belief that they're going to achieve those goals, and they focus on successful completion, not perfection, not perfection. They focus on successful completion. And they don't have, boy, I really made a lot of mistakes on this one. Sorry about that. They don't have that, that internal like negative, oh, I'll never get this done. But instead they have, I'll make it, I won't give up. And they trust that, they trust themselves to adjust and be flexible. So one of the most important things that we can do is look for those perfectionists, get rid of that black and white thinking, teach them flexibility, because it impacts every other area of their mental health. All right, so I already talked about this quite a bit, so I'm going to move on. We want to develop pathways thinking, and this is scaling, or it is literally drawing a map, right? And looking at the road and where are the places to stop along the way, and what's going to be a logical sequence manner, and celebrating each of those smaller components that are mastered. One of the things that I think is really important, and I don't know, it just takes a while to make this shift for kids, but journey, not destination. Journey, not destination. Process, not product. What am I learning along the way? Not the end grade, but evaluate my learning along the way. Self-evaluate. my learning along the way, not the end grade. Developing that personal meaning or agency thinking. This is hard too. You would be surprised. Maybe you probably wouldn't be surprised. You've been working with gifted kids for a long time. How many gifted kids set their goals based on what they think their teachers want of them or their parents want of them? And even sometimes what they think their peers expect them to say, rather than their own, the goals that are personally meaningful to them. So it's important for us to help them develop that agency thinking, because they're much more likely to be flexible with themselves and achieve those goals if they're their own goals, not what they think somebody else wants for them.